When you go silent, something powerful happens that most people completely misunderstand. It's not punishment, it's not a tactic, it's a reset. For a long time, your presence carried emotional weight, texts, explanations, reactions, reassurance, whether you meant to or not. That constant availability kept her emotions busy, cluttered, and overstimulated. When you finally step back, the noise disappears. And in that quiet, her mind finally has room to feel. At first, silence feels uncomfortable to her. She's used to knowing where you stand, used to the emotional feedback loop. When that loop breaks, the nervous system reacts not with clarity right away, but with confusion. And confusion is important because confusion forces attention. She starts wondering why you stopped reacting, why you didn't chase, why you didn't ask for closure or validation. That curiosity is the doorway where emotional reflection begins. Here's the key: most people miss emotions cannot reset while pressure is still present. As long as you're explaining yourself, defending your intentions, or trying to be understood, her emotional state stays defensive. Silence removes the need for resistance. There's nothing to push against anymore, no argument to win, no emotion to manage. And once resistance fades, the true feelings missing, comparison, nostalgia, can finally surface on their own. Your absence also creates contrast. When you were always there, your value blended in the background. Familiarity dulls emotional impact, but distance sharpens perception. She begins to notice the space you used to fill, the calm conversations, the consistency, the emotional grounding you brought without demanding anything back. And now that it's gone, the mind does what it always does. It tries to restore balance. Silence also changes the story she tells herself. When someone keeps chasing, the subconscious narrative becomes, I'm in control. But when you step away with dignity, that story breaks. Now the question shifts to, why isn't he trying to convince me? And that question is far more powerful than any explanation you could have given. It suggests self-respect, it suggests strength, it suggests that your value exists with or without a response. Another subtle shift happens during silence. Her emotions stop being influenced by your reactions. When you react emotionally, you unknowingly guide how she feels: guilt, reassurance, irritation, comfort. Silence removes that influence. What she feels next is entirely hers. And emotions that arise naturally without pressure attach deeper. If she misses you on her own, that feeling carries weight. If she realizes your absence brings discomfort, that realization becomes personal. And while she's processing, something equally important is happening on your side. Silence gives you back your center. You stop leaking energy into uncertainty. You regain emotional stability. This shift alone changes the dynamic. Because when and if she reaches out, she doesn't meet the same emotional position she left. She meets calm, groundedness. A man who didn't fall apart when she stepped away. That stability rewrites her perception entirely. Silence isn't about waiting, it's about allowing space for truth to surface without interference, without force, without fear. And when emotions reset naturally, what returns is often stronger, clearer, and more committed than what left. Sometimes the strongest move isn't to speak at all, but to let absence do the talking. Most connections don't break because of a lack of love, they break because of pressure. Pressure to respond a certain way, pressure to reassure, pressure to decide before emotions are ready. When someone feels emotionally cornered, their instinct isn't closeness, it's distance. And the moment you remove that pressure, everything begins to shift in your favor. Emotional safety is rarely talked about, but it governs every decision she makes. It's the feeling that she can exist around you without being judged, controlled, rushed, or emotionally managed. When pressure enters a connection through constant checking, explanations, or subtle demands, it signals instability, not because you care, because the care comes with expectations attached. And expectations, when felt too strongly, make commitment feel like a trap instead of a choice. When you stop pushing for reassurance or outcomes, you communicate something powerful without words. You are free to feel what you feel. That freedom lowers her defenses. The nervous system relaxes when it senses there's no emotional consequence for honesty. She doesn't have to protect herself from your reaction. She doesn't have to calculate what to say to keep the peace. And in that relaxed state, authenticity finally has room to appear. Here's where most people go wrong. They believe emotional safety means constant availability and endless patience. It doesn't. Emotional safety comes from predictability, calm, and self-control. When you don't react impulsively, when you don't make her responsible for your emotional state, you become emotionally safe. She can step closer without fearing emotional chaos. She can invest without worrying that one wrong move will create conflict. Pressure also distorts perception. When you push, she doesn't experience your value. She experiences your need, and need, no matter how well intentioned, creates imbalance. Emotional safety restores balance. It places you back into a grounded position where your presence feels like an option, not an obligation. And people commit more deeply to what they feel free to choose. Another shift happens when pressure disappears. Her emotions start moving toward you instead of away from you. Resistance melts when there's nothing to resist. She begins to reflect rather than react. Instead of focusing on how to create space, she starts noticing the absence of tension, the peace, the lack of emotional pull, and that absence becomes noticeable in a world full of emotional noise. Emotional safety also allows her to imagine a future again. When pressure exists, the future feels heavy. It feels like more explaining, more managing, more responsibility. But when she feels safe, the future feels calm, stable, simple. She begins to associate you with ease rather than effort. And ease is what the heart gravitates toward when everything else feels demanding. This is why convincing never works long term. You can't argue someone into commitment. You can only create an environment where commitment feels natural. Emotional safety does that quietly. It doesn't force decisions, it invites them. It doesn't chase, it attracts, and it allows her to come back because she wants to, not because she feels pushed to. When she returns under emotional safety, her commitment is different. It's voluntary, it's grounded, and it lasts because it was built in peace, not pressure. One of the strongest signals you can ever send without saying a word is that your life remains stable, whether she is present or not. Consistency without attachment is rare, and that's exactly why it stands out. Most people unknowingly attach their emotional state to someone else's behavior. When attention comes, they're high. When it disappears, they collapse. But when you remain grounded through both, you communicate inner strength that can't be faked. When she steps away and sees that you didn't unravel, something shifts in her perception. She expected emotion, reaction, or at least some visible disruption. Instead, she sees steadiness. Your tone doesn't change, your direction doesn't change, your self respect doesn't change. That consistency sends a subconscious message. Your identity and value are self generated, not borrowed from her approval. Attachment creates pressure, and pressure creates distance. But consistency without attachment removes both. You're not cold and you're not distant. You're simply centered. You care, but you don't cling. You value connection, but you don't depend on it to feel whole. That balance makes you emotionally attractive because it suggests maturity, confidence, and reliability all at once. This kind of consistency also builds trust in a way words never can. Anyone can promise stability when things are going well. Very few can maintain it when uncertainty enters the picture. When she sees you continue your routine, your purpose, and your emotional composure during distance, she begins to trust that you won't become unpredictable under pressure. And trust is the foundation of commitment. Another subtle shift happens internally for her. When she realizes you aren't chasing validation, she stops feeling responsible for your emotional well being. That relief is powerful. It allows her to explore her feelings honestly without fear of hurting you or being pulled back by guilt. Ironically, removing that responsibility often draws her closer because closeness no longer feels like emotional labor. Consistency also restores polarity. Emotional imbalance blurs attraction. When one person overinvests and the other pulls away, desire fades. But when you stay steady and self contained, the dynamic rebalances. She begins to feel the pull again, not because you asked for it, but because your grounded presence creates emotional gravity. This doesn't mean you become passive or unavailable. It means you respond rather than react. You speak when it's aligned, not when it's anxious. You engage when there's clarity, not when there's fear. That selective engagement makes every interaction feel intentional instead of desperate. And intention is deeply attractive. Over time, she starts comparing this version of you to others. She notices how rare it is to feel calm around someone who isn't trying to control outcomes. She feels safe leaning in because she knows you won't tip over emotionally if things move slowly. That safety, combined with attraction, creates a desire to commit, not impulsively, but fully. Consistency without attachment turns you into an emotional anchor rather than an emotional wave. And when someone has felt that kind of stability, they don't forget it easily. Because what's steady doesn't beg to be chosen. It quietly becomes the place they return to. When you stop trying to prove yourself, something interesting happens. You don't disappear, you sharpen. Effort used to chase approval often hides value instead of revealing. Explaining, convincing, justifying, reminding her of what you offer, all that subtly communicates uncertainty. The moment you step back from that cycle, you quietly reclaim your position as the standard she once measured everything against. Being the standard isn't about ego or superiority, it's about alignment. When you live with disciplined boundaries and self respect, your behavior becomes consistent enough to be felt. You no longer react to emotional shifts, you move according to your principles. That steadiness creates a reference point in her mind. Even when she's away, she compares new experiences to the way things felt with you. Most people believe value is created by effort. In reality, value is revealed by restraint. When you stop offering access without reciprocity, your presence gains weight. She remembers how you didn't over explain, how you didn't need validation, how you didn't bend yourself to fit uncertainty. And in contrast to emotional inconsistency elsewhere, that memory becomes clearer. Distance amplifies this effect. When you're no longer trying to impress her in real time, she fills in the gaps herself. The mind exaggerates what it respects. She recalls the calm conversations, the grounded decisions, the emotional maturity you showed when things weren't easy. And because you're not there trying to influence her perception, the image becomes hers, not something you constructed. Another shift happens when she notices you didn't downgrade yourself after the separation. You didn't rush into chaos. You didn't post for attention. You didn't seek reassurance publicly or privately. That composure sends a message stronger than any speech, who you are. And when someone knows who they are, they don't need to convince anyone else. Being the standard also means you don't compete. You don't ask how you compare. You don't chase replacement. You stay in your lane, building your life with quiet confidence. That non competitive energy stands out because it's rare. It suggests abundance. It suggests that your worth isn't negotiable or situational. As time passes, she begins to notice how other interactions feel heavy, less clear, more emotionally demanding, and comparison is inevitable, not because you forced it, but because standards create contrast. She realizes that what she felt with you wasn't common, it was stable, intentional, real. And now that she's experienced the absence of that standard, the difference becomes undeniable. When she thinks about returning, it's not out of nostalgia alone, it's recognition that you represented something solid in a world that often feels uncertain, recognition that you didn't lower yourself to be chosen, and recognition that commitment to you wouldn't feel like settling, it would feel like aligning upward. You become the standard again, not by reminding her, but by remaining yourself without compromise. And standards don't chase, they're remembered. The moment she feels that returning is her decision, everything changes, not just emotionally, but psychologically. When someone chooses on their own, they don't just come back, they invest, they protect, they commit. But when they feel guided, convinced, or emotionally nudged into a decision, doubt quietly lingers beneath the surface. That's why chasing never creates real loyalty. It only creates temporary compliance. When you stop pursuing explaining or trying to pull her back, you remove influence from the equation. You step out of the role of persuader and return to the role of presence. This allows her emotions to move freely without interference. And freedom is essential because when people choose freely, they value deeply. What they're convinced into, they subconsciously resist. Her mind begins to shift from defense to reflection. Instead of thinking about how to maintain distance, she starts thinking about what she actually feels. Without pressure clouding her emotional space, she becomes more aware of absence, contrast, and memory. She notices what's missing. She notices the emotional steadiness she once had, and she notices the difference between attention and connection. This internal process is delicate. Any attempt to rush it interrupts it. When you chase, you pull her attention outward. When you stay grounded, you allow her attention to move inward. And inward attention is where realization is born. She begins to understand that her emotions are pointing back toward you, not because she was guided there, but because it feels true. Another powerful shift happens when she realizes you're not waiting, not in bitterness, not in desperation, but in self respect. You're living, growing, continuing forward. That energy removes emotional leverage from her hands and returns it to balance. Now, coming back is no longer about power or control, it becomes about alignment. Choice also changes how she sees you. If she comes back because she chose to, you are no longer someone she allowed back into her life. You become someone she decided to build with. That psychological repositioning is everything. Transforms the dynamic from uncertainty to intention, from hesitation to clarity. There's also an emotional pride attached to self made decisions. When she returns on her own, she feels ownership over that choice. And people protect what they feel ownership over. They invest more, they communicate more, they care more, not because they're afraid to lose, but because they chose to stay. This is why restraint is powerful. You allow the story to become hers. You allow the realization to feel personal. You allow the decision to feel earned rather than influenced. And that makes the commitment stronger than anything persuasion could create. Her return under these conditions feels different. It's calmer, clearer, more grounded. There's less emotional confusion and more emotional certainty. She isn't testing. She isn't questioning. She isn't unsure. She knows why she came back. And because it was her choice, she stands by it. Because what someone chooses freely, they hold on intentionally. When she comes back, the biggest mistake you can make is trying to return to who you were before. That version existed in a different dynamic, one shaped by uncertainty, emotional imbalance, and lessons that have now been learned. If you rewind the past, you invite the same patterns to resurface. But when you lead differently, you create a completely new foundation. Leading differently starts with restraint. You don't interrogate her decision. You don't ask for explanations, apologies, or reassurance. You don't reopen wounds to feel validated. Those actions signal insecurity, even if they're understandable. Instead, you accept her presence calmly, as if her return is welcome but not surprising. That quiet confidence shifts the power dynamic immediately. You also don't rush intimacy, emotional, otherwise. Urgency is rooted in fear of loss. Calm pacing is rooted in trust in yourself. By moving forward slowly and intentionally, you signal emotional maturity. You show her that connection with you isn't chaotic or reactive, it's steady, thoughtful, and grounded. That alone makes the relationship feel safer than before. Clear boundaries are another form of leadership. You don't punish her with distance, but you also don't abandon your standards. You communicate openly, but without emotional excess. You listen without over accommodating. Boundaries tell her that being with you means entering a space of mutual respect, not emotional volatility or imbalance. Leading differently also means you stay present, focused. You don't replay the breakup. You don't constantly reference what almost happened. You don't use the past as leverage or protection. You build forward. When the energy is forward moving, the connection feels alive rather than fragile. She senses that this isn't a second chance, it's a new chapter. Your emotional tone matters more than your words. Calm curiosity replaces anxiety. Stability replaces intensity. You respond rather than react. Even in moments of disagreement, you remain centered. That emotional regulation signals reliability. It tells her that future challenges won't threaten the foundation. And that's what transforms attraction into commitment. Another shift happens internally for her. She realizes she didn't return to fix something broken, she returned to something solid. That distinction is crucial. Fixing feels like work, stability feels like relief, and people commit to what brings relief, not stress. You also continue to lead your life independently. Your purpose doesn't pause because she's back. Your growth doesn't slow down. Your self respect remains intact. That independence reinforces the dynamic that originally drew her back. It reminds her that she chose a man with direction, not someone whose world revolves around her presence. When she senses this new leadership, her behavior adjusts naturally. She invests more because she feels secure. She communicates more clearly because she trusts the environment. She commits more deeply because the connection feels intentional rather than emotional. This is how commitment becomes sustainable, not through promises or pressure, but through consistent leadership, emotional maturity, and self respect. And when you lead like this, her return isn't temporary, it's anchored.